Так, раз, два. Раз, два, три.
Идет загрузка. Идет загрузка. Идет загрузка. Идет загрузка. Оптимизация процессов. Идет загрузка. Идет загрузка. Биомеханика начинается прямо сейчас.
Добрый вечер. Добрый вечер. Добрый вечер.
Официальный партнер фестиваля «Биомеханика» дом.рф. Идет загрузка. Приветствуем всех зрителей в трансляции. Биомеханика начинается прямо сейчас. Идет загрузка. Официальный партнер фестиваля «Биомеханика» дом.рф.
Добрый вечер. Это «Биомеханика», фестиваль мультимедийной музыки. И сегодня мы продолжаем серию концертов-презентаций. У нас будет в эфире Франка Бедросян. Это формат концертов, который мы совмещаем с открытыми интервью. И вот интервьюером Франка будет сегодня композитор Антон Светличный. Вначале действительно будет небольшая беседа с Франком, где Антон задаст несколько вопросов композитору. А затем музыканты CEAM Artists, инженеры и музыканты исполнят два его произведения, а после будет такая свободная часть, где вы тоже сможете задать свои вопросы, и неважно, находитесь ли вы здесь, в арт-пространстве Артемьев, или в трансляции, ВКонтакте или на YouTube. Мы тоже читаем чат, поэтому если вдруг вам захочется что-то спросить напрямую у композитора, пожалуйста, не стесняйтесь. Встреча пройдет на английском языке, и если вам нужна будет помощь с переводом вопросов, то я тоже могу вам с этим помочь. Как раз вам нужно будет дождаться тогда меня с микрофоном, чтобы Франк услышал ваш вопрос, или я смогла его перевести, если будет такая необходимость. Ну что же, я тогда всех приветствую и передаю слово уже Антону. И мы рады приветствовать на биомеханике Франка Бедросяна. Спасибо.
Всем добрый день. Главное, чтобы мы увидели Франка.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Frank. We hear you very good, I think. Yes?
Yes.
Thanks. So do you hear me?
Yeah, it's perfect.
So, okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. We're really ready to listen to your pieces and to listen to you, actually. So I think I'll start with kind of maybe surprise question. Today in the social networks of CEAM, I read a kind of unusual question, maybe. Maybe you have something to answer to it. The question was like this. One of the commentators listened today piano quintet by Johannes Brahms. And after that, he came to some social network in Telegram and asked why Brahms is, the music of Brahms is so complex and contemporary music is so simple. So do you have something to answer to it? That's not necessary, of course, but...
Well, first of all, I would like to thank everyone, the whole team of the festival, for inviting me. It's important for me, as I came to Russia in the past several times, actually, and I always enjoyed that moment. So I'm very happy to participate. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. Now, when it comes to the surprise question, I'm surprised. I'm surprised because it's generally, as you know, the other way around. That people find that a romantic language, let's say of the 19th century, in the case of Brahms, is much easier to comprehend and to understand because all the codes are known. Let's say now with the distance that we have in the 21st century, we know all the codes of Brahms, and what could happen to be new at the time is now well known. Now, there is maybe, I would like, I'm not in the mind of the person who wrote this, as you can
Me too,
imagine.
actually.
I can only guess. It depends how you listen. I think that you have so many kinds of new music and new music style nowadays. I mean, to what you're gonna listen in a few minutes from to American minimalism, or that you cannot put it in the same box, I would say. So I don't know what kind of music this person had in mind. One thing is sure is that I think that if you accept to listen to any kind of music without looking for something that does not exist in this music. For instance, if you for the pieces that you're going to listen now, if you're looking for a melody, it's going to be quite complicated for you because, of course, it's not the main purpose of the music. You know, if you're listening a Bach choral, for instance, and that you're looking for transformations of timbre, it's going to be a problem because there is none. So I think that, once again, I don't know what this person had in mind, but my feeling is that when you accept to listen to a music for what it is and not for what it should be, I don't know if it's clear enough, then things are becoming more simple. There is another thing also, I don't know if this can be applied to my music, but it's true that I always thought, since I was writing, that it was important to have several layers of perception in any kind of piece of music. I'll give you a very close example to you. When I first heard The Rite of Spring of Stravinsky, of course, I was shocked in two ways. First, intellectually, because it was very different from what I was listening when I was 12, 13, when I discovered the piece. And second, I realized that there was also a physical impact that was very direct. And these two aspects, two types of perceptions are very important. I like to be taken physically by music. And when I write, I try also to be very direct. So I hope that people listening to my music, for instance, would feel it, that it's enigmatic enough and complex enough so that they want to go back to it as an enigma, but also that the music hopefully is direct enough for an immediate encounter with you. You know what I mean? I'm attached to those two types of perception, one which is complex, another one which is simple. And this is the only response I can give for now.
Okay, thank you. And I think my next question will be actually about going back in some sense. We have today in our program two pieces of you which are rather early. In your catalog, one is called Transmission. It's written around 25 and 24 years ago. And second one called The Edges Are No Longer Parallel. And it was written, if I'm not mistaken, 12 years ago, in 2013. So how do you feel when you need to return to old pieces? During listening or during rehearsal? Do you often review old compositions? Or, for example, if you need to adapt electronic parts to new operating systems, do you use it as a chance to change something, or you rather prefer to keep it as it is?
Okay, you know, it's a very, very interesting question and not solved yet. When it comes, there are two questions, let's say, here. The first one is about how do I feel when it comes to, you say, old pieces. Well, hopefully, I would say they are not old. In the sense that I don't want that myself, I feel, oh, I was so young and so naive when I wrote this. You know, this kind of feeling. I don't want that. Well, and the good news is that it's not the case. I mean, when I listen to most of the pieces that I wrote, in, let's say, 95% of the time, I feel like it's a photograph of me which was taken maybe 20, 25 years ago. I'm not exactly the same now, and I would not write the same piece. But I still recognize myself in the mirror, let's say. And this is the most important thing, that I still enjoy working with musicians during the rehearsal. And I think that the piece is solid from beginning to the end. One thing I could tell about those two pieces, but especially about Transmission, which is a piece for bassoon and electronics. Well, to respond to your question, I still like the piece and I like to listen to it. For me, it's still fresh in my mind, but I know in the meantime that I would not write exactly the same thing today. Why? For instance, at that time in 2001, 2002, and until 2007, I think, the jazz music was something quite influential for me. And as time passed, it became less and less influential. I remember that in the 90s especially, I was listening to a lot of Charles Mingus, of Cecil Taylor. This was the influence for me. And when I was 30 years old, still I was very influenced by this type of approach of music. So it's true that in the bassoon and electronics piece, for instance, you will hear some influence of jazz. Nowadays, I don't have that much obvious influences in my music. It became something else, but I still like it. So this for the first part of the question. The second part is about the electronics. Well, this piece, Transmission, was made in IRCAM in 2001, and the other one is 2012 in Gram. It's another center in France, kind of smaller IRCAM, if you want, for those who know. And often when the piece is played, as you know, the electronics get old because the systems are going very fast, and someone needs to handle the patch, the dispositive, and make it new. But it's true that so far, and that's why it's an interesting question, I never sensed that I needed to change the electronics again. The sounds remain the same. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I should change, you will tell me by email. No, but I mean, it's something which could be thought as being like cinema, you know, when you are restoring the image and change it and upgrade it and so on. But I did not do it. Why? I think that it's okay for me to let the photograph that I was speaking about, you know, the photograph intact, in the sense that it's a part of me at one point, and changing the electronics again and again, even if possible, would not be completely okay, in the sense that I feel that I'm attached to the idea that I'm giving something which was a part of me at one point in my life, and I don't want to traffic, to artificially change it. So I prefer to do another piece, let's say, with electronics if needed, yeah.
I think Gerard Grisez said something like, if I remember right, that he doesn't like he doesn't like to return to his old pieces. He rather wanted to compose something new. So about transmission, I think I should give a short kind of preview for the piece to our audience. So correct me if I'll say something wrong. So it was an important piece for you because it was a piece in which you first formulated your personal style, actually, more or less at least. It was performed many times after, and several commissions came as a consequence of its premiere. And the idea was to explore the unused sound potential of the bassoon which can sound not only like bassoon in symphony orchestra as we know it, but also like human voice, or sometimes like an electric guitar or like electronic synthesis. And so take this new kind of bassoon sound and put it in the bath of acid electronics.
Yeah, that's what I said at one point. Yes. Do you want me to
no, it's kind of intro, and the question goes after that. So you said that, as you said, the piece was written during the CEAM course, and the assignment was to compose a piece with good balance between instrument and electronics. But there is also an opinion which I read and under the YouTube video of one of the performance. Actually, I like so much the YouTube comments. They are really funny or very interesting sometimes. So the opinion was that the electronics, maybe the use of electronics here is actually the complete opposite of the usual ideas about good balance, natural relationships, etc. And funny thing for me is that the both statements seem equally valid, at least for me. So how do you feel about this piece and this relationship between instrumental sound, acoustic sound of bassoon and electronics? How do you see this relationship, as an internal conflict or really balance, or even a kind of new form of harmony maybe?
Okay, you know, I think that when I did the piece, I was, and in general, not only this one, but most of my pieces are starting with very intuitive ideas. I don't have a concept that I would then try to apply to music. I'm not a conceptual artist from that viewpoint at all. But in order to respond to your question, this intuition came of the piece, of the idea of the piece, having a bassoon which is out of its context, the symphonic one, completely. Put in a bath which is hostile, because yes, the big problem of this piece, conceptually, it was not a problem for me, it was a motivation, is that historically the bassoon has no relationship with the electronics whatsoever. If you think of saxophone, yes, you think of electricity, of jazz, free jazz, and kind of acid jazz, and there is a history between saxophone and electronics. Even in a way, some other instruments, there were things with clarinet, even with flute at CEAM. But bassoon, there was only 2 pieces I remember back in 2000, and not so significant, I would say. So my question mark was, what can I do? Actually, the thing was, I met a bassoon player, the one who was a student at the time, like me, at the Conservatoire de Paris, and he showed me that I had prejudices about the bassoon. I thought it was a symphonic, a bit awkward instrument that you have in Pierre Leloup and other kinds of things. It was a little bit, I had many cliches in my mind. And when he showed me what happens with the techniques of today, I was mesmerized, because I realized that the bassoon had a richer personality and not conventional. In the sense that, as you said, sometimes it sounds like, with some special techniques, sometimes it can sound like a voice, sometimes like an electric guitar, sometimes like a bad saxophone, etc. And this capacity to transform, almost in a kind of changing of personality, was extremely interesting for me, because I thought that this potential change of personality via special instrumental techniques, plus live electronics that would even amplify the transformation, would possibly create a relationship which is ambiguous, because sometimes the bassoon sounds like electronic, that sometimes you would feel that it's a love-hate relationship, because they have this kind of violent articulation between them. And even in the end, I think it's quite mysterious, in the sense that you don't know who dies first, if it's the bassoon or the electronics. So if you want, I felt that there was a potential for a drama, with enigmas, with unsaid things, with kind of intensity, mimetism between the two. And I chose also some electronics which are a bit trash, kind of, so that it can respond to the awkwardness of the bassoon.
Okay, thank you. And I think maybe a couple of more questions about the second piece. The edges are no longer parallel. It was written several years after the concept of saturation was formulated and made public. And so at the time of its composition, did you feel the limitations of this kind of brand imposed on you by yourself and by Raphael Sendo and some others? And have you attempted to go beyond these limitations? So in short, can we call this piece post-saturalist?
Well, I don't know. You know what? I think that it's interesting for a composer to think, to write articles, to try to formulate things as I did. It was back in 2008 exactly that this formulation happened. But I think that it can be dangerous. I don't know if there are some composers in the hall here, but
many, I think. Yeah.
I think that it can be dangerous to indulge in conception, because the risk is that the most sensitive and intuitive part of your invention could try to conform itself to intellectual ideas. So I thought that if I was to speak much more about this concept of saturation, it might become dangerous and would prevent me of imagining other things. So that's why at one point I wanted to stop. But one thing I can tell, to respond to your question, is about this piano piece. I think the idea of excess in general, which transform the sound, or the speed, the excess of speed, which is changing the physiognomy and the personality of an instrument, is something which is in all my pieces. In the sense that when we spoke about this saturation thing, I guess it was more a kind of summary of some aspects, but it was not a game changer because my style was the same before and after. It was more a way for me to be formulating things, to clarify things for me, but it was not a moment of discovery, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And after that, I think it's important, once you formulated things, not to start being narcissistic about them, you know, because it's super dangerous, I think, for an artist in general. Yeah.
Okay, very short next question. British singer-songwriter Morrissey has the song with the name which exactly like the name of the piece. The edges are no longer parallel. Did it have any influence here, or it's just coincidence? Maybe?
Well, that's a kind of not a joke. I don't know exactly the word in English. Maybe tongue-in-cheek or something like some ironic. I'm going to explain why. This piece has a particularity. It's my only piece in my catalog which has a twin in my catalog. There is another piece that I composed before in 2010, which is called Edges, and is made for piano and percussion. And I had, a few months later, a piano commission for piano and electronics. And I thought, and I proposed to the artistic director of Graham at the time, that I could do a piece for electronics, piano electronics, that was the commission, that would be deduced from the first one. It was officially a project of making a twin piece, if you want. And they said, okay, so it was clear, and I kept more or less the same piano part. It's exactly the same than the piano and percussion piece. And I reinvented completely the electronics, which is not at all the same as the percussion in the first one, the one of 2010. So what happened, basically, if you listen to the two pieces, it happened once in concert that the two pieces were played, you almost have not the impression of the same piece at all, while the piano part is the same, because the electronics is so different from the percussion that you don't have this impression. So it's like if the piano was in two different places. And that's why I chose this title. The edges are no longer parallel. It means before it was edges for piano and percussion. And now that the electronics has been replacing percussion, the lines are not parallel, and it fuses completely. So yes, it's a song by British singer Morrissey, which I like very much, by the way. But keeping this title, it was a way of kind of ironic, let's say, a gesture, because even if I like the song itself, it has nothing to do with my music. It's true. I mean, it's very, very different. There is this rock energy, I think, in general in my music, but not especially of this song. Beautiful song, by the way. Huh?
Yeah, I listened to it and I like it. I like it too. So actually, this is also the answer to our previous question on remaking the electronics or going back to old pieces.
Exactly.
I think the last question before the start listening, you once said that noise, which integrated into a composition, can have different meanings in relation to other elements. Particularly, it can be a poison or a kind of light or a threat, maybe something else. So what's for you the meaning of noise in these two pieces?
Well, that's a vast subject. One thing I can tell you in general is that there are several layers of connection between the instrument and the electronic noise, I would say. The first one is at an acoustic level. Because you have this noise element in the electronic parts that I'm designing, and you have also some noise in the instrument writing alone, you have a degree of encounter which is as if noise was a common territory where they can discuss, imitate each other, and fight each other. They look sometimes the same. The bassoon sometimes will sound electronic because of the noise element. And sometimes the electronic sounds instrumental because it has this kind of vintage color which is noisy. Okay? So this is the acoustic level. But I think that in general, it's not that I think, it's the case that the instrumental symphonic tradition goes against noise in general. All those beautiful instruments that we love, the flute, the clarinet, the violin, they have been designed in order to erase the noise element. That's why they are so sophisticated organologically. And it's true that the project in my music is to do the other way around, is to promote, in a way, the noise element in the instrument, and also to get in touch with the noise and the savage element of electronics. So, in the end, by enhancing the noise aspect in the instrument, I make it more electronic. And by enhancing the noise aspect in the electronics, I make it maybe more instrumental in the way I did it. So it's a way also formally, in terms of vocabulary, for me to create connection. Yeah.
So thank you very much. I think we'll stop here for a little music. Are we ready to begin the concert? Someone hears me. So we will continue our discussion, our meeting with Frank after the two pieces of him.
Thank you.
we would like to thank our musicians for this very impressive performance. And please, our audience, feel free to ask your questions. Let's check if Frank is here.
So we see Frank, if we hear him. Hi, Frank.
Yes, hello.
Thank you very much. I think this applause will be for you for now.
I would like to thank, first of all, the musicians, Sergei and Fedosia, yeah, because they are very impressive. I mean, but of course, they worked without me being close to them, as you can imagine. And despite of that, I'm impressed by their commitments, their musicality. So thank you to them both, of course, and also to the technicians, because especially in the second piece, the piano piece, I had the impression where I am that the balance, I don't know how it was for you in the hall, but the balance between the electronics and the instrumental and the piano and the transformations were really creating sometimes another instrument, and it's not something easy to do. So it was very well done. So I hope you enjoyed. But for me, I want to congratulate everyone, really, sincerely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think we have some questions from our audience.
Yeah, let's start with them.
So let's start with them. Yes, please.
Thank you a lot, Frank, for it was a great pleasure to both listen to your compositions and to have this opportunity to talk to you. I wonder if how do you consider this connection between chance and this physical, material effect that your compositions have on listener? Do you conceptualize it anyhow? And if this when you include it in the process, does it affect this connection between chance, the random element, and the physiological effect that your music has? Thank you.
Well, thanks for your question. I will try to address it. I'm not completely sure I understood, but I'm going to address. When you speak about some aspects of the piece that would be, according to you, random or less written, less precise, and the physicality out of it, right? That's the question. Okay. So, I don't know if you saw the score, but when you look at the end of the bassoon piece, not the whole piece is not at all asking any improvisation. Everything is written in a kind of constraining way. But the ending has a solo part, which is more or less improvised, but in such constraining way that there is not so much freedom. It's the illusion of freedom, to respond to your question. So this is for the bassoon piece. But for the piano part, you have some moments when I'm asking to play very often as fast as possible. And in the score, if you take a look, you will see that some elements are just with boxes where people should play as fast as possible with precise notes or special sound, etc. And what is the goal of that? Maybe as you had the intuition of it, it's a very clever question, because random is never for being random or even for being cool or whatever. Generally, when I'm not writing very precisely what I want and I put some spaces of improvisation inside the score and I mix them with very constraining rhythm also, it's a mix really. What happens is that the person will have the possibility, the interpreter will have the possibility of feeling freer with the gesture, so that he can spend all his energy in the gesture. Whilst if I had written very precisely everything, it would not be the same physicality and the same energy. In other terms, when I give some spaces of freedom, it's always very constraining, and the thing is, there is a tension between the randomness and the strict things that I want to obtain. And this tension is, hopefully, in my mind at least, creating the drama and the conflict inside the playing. If there was only strict moments, I think I would not manage to have the freedom of the gesture. And if there was only random aspects or improvise, I would not feel the accuracy of the rhythm that I really want. So I'm mixing things in order to obtain this physicality which is born from the conflict between randomness and precision. I don't know if it's clear enough.
Yeah, it's clear. Great answer. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? We have a question in Russian, so I'm trying to translate.
Здравствуйте. Вот я пришел на ваш концерт с моим 13-летним сыном.
So he came to the concert with his 13-year-old son.
И мой 13-летний сын сказал, что я тоже так могу.
And his son said that he can do something like this himself.
Это первая часть вопроса, что вы ответите ему.
So this is the first part of the question. What can you answer to this?
И вторая часть вопроса, уважаемый композитор, верите ли вы в то, что музыка созидает физическое и духовное в человеке? И верите ли вы в Бога?
So second part is,
Спасибо.
do you believe that music makes or something like that the spiritual in the man, and do you believe in God?
Wow, it's a lot of questions in one. Huh? So the full package. So I will try to respond. But first of all, I also have 2 sons, and one of them is 16, so he's not very far from 13. So I can respond for this aspect. I guess that in the case of the perception of someone who is not used, let's say, it's not only the children, I think, but also adults are in the same boat sometimes. They might think that the freedom of the gesture that we just spoke about for the previous question is perceptible and can give the impression that the musician, and that's the question of your son, I think, the musician is free to decide what he wants and doing it for himself without the help of a composer who tells him what to do, tells him or her what to do. And that the freedom is infinite, and that for being infinitely free, we don't need a composer. I think that's the sense of the question and the surprise. The thing is, in order to have this feeling of complete freedom, when you're composing music, you need to artificially create this impression by the means of writing. Otherwise, it's not possible to make a form. So the response I would have for your son, what's his name, by the way? I don't hear.
His name is Further.
Further, okay. So his question, I think, for me, I take it more or less in a way as a compliment, because it proves that in the writing, I could create the perception of an improvisation, of the fact that the musician is free of doing it himself. That's my question. And when I write, I try to create a spontaneity in the feeling. I'm not interested in when people tell me that they thought a lot or reflect a lot during my music. I want something very direct. So if people who are not specialists of new music, let's say, as generally the children are not, or even people who are not listening to a lot of new music, if they feel that it's not complex to follow in a way, I win, because I think that I want, once again, what I was saying to Anton before the piece started, before the concert started. I said, I'm not willing to have only 1 degree when people think a lot during the piece, etc., but also a moment of physicality, that they think that we have a feeling of chaos sometimes. And I think this is also the sense of the question of your son. And the idea that he can do it himself, I think it's an illusion, but it's an illusion that I created in the score. So I think it's important to understand that the feeling sometimes can be this one, but if it was completely free and not written, we wouldn't have the impression of a beginning and an ending and something in between. But yes, that's great that you come with your son in a concert like this. It's really great. Yeah. Now there was another part of the question.
About your, beliefs,
right?
and spiritual beliefs.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say I'm a believer, but I believe in spirituality. I'm believing in spirituality in the sense that I think that writing a piece of music is a kind of celebration, which would create a feeling of, in the best case, of suspension of time. In the sense that when the music is really intense, you lose the sense of passing of time. At least for me, this is the feeling that I'm looking for when I'm listening to the music that I prefer. I forget the passing of time. And for me, this is a spiritual experience. So I think without being a believer, and I'm honest with you, it's not that I'm not tempted of believing. I have many reasons that would make me try to believe. But even though I'm doubting a lot, I try to reach some kind of feeling, existential feeling, that is spiritual. I really believe that artists, believers or not, have a spiritual role in this world, and we are part of it. Yes. Once again, I hope my answer is clear enough.
Yes, and we have one more question from transmission. It is a question from Yulia Migunova, our cellist. And the question is, do you have plans to write a piece for cello with electronics?
Well, I wrote a piece for cello. It was back in 2014, whose name is The Spider as an Artist. And this piece is purely instrumental. There is no electronics. And I think in this piece, in 2014, I did my best to create this feeling of having an instrumental music which sounds like electronic, but without electronics. Why? Because I think that when you're creating the illusion, the acoustic illusion of a presence of electronic within an instrumental, purely instrumental world, for me there is a kind of ambiguity which is very poetic, and a creation of something which is very mysterious about the sound source. So at that time, it was in 2014, I wrote this piece, I was happy with it, and it's going to be performed in a few days here in Graz. But so far, I'd never tried to write a piece for cello solo and electronics. It could be because of all the pieces for string instruments and electronics, I find that the cello with the double bass are the two best instruments for marrying with the electronics. I find it more difficult with viola and more difficult with violin, because maybe the sound of the spectrum from the very low to the high is richer with those two instruments and can match the electronic sound better. So to respond to the question, it's not impossible that I do it in the future. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. It's Tatiana. Nice to see you again. I was in Impulse on festival 2 years ago, and I was impressed by your piece Ages, and it was performed by Dmitry Batalov. I know audience know him a lot here, and he told me that this piece was changed with you when we worked, and that's why my question is about how much your piece can be changed when you're working with the performance.
Okay, that's an excellent question. Thank you very much, because it's still something that I'm processing. And I ask myself the question, exactly like you do today, to myself a few times. First of all, precisely about this performance that Dimitri, it was a Zone Experimental Basel, and he was a part of it, right? Well, I must say that they gave a very, very good interpretation that day, and it's true that a few days before, I saw them twice, I think. I spent a lot of time with them, which was great. And here is what happened. First of all, one must say the score is still pending in terms of editing and publishing, because I need to revise a bit the notation, and it's still pending. So that's the reason why also not everything was completely strict when I met them. Well, it's still in the making, but I think it's going to be in the end okay in a few months or so. But to respond precisely to the question, I remember that when I worked with Dimitri and his partner on the piece, there was this question mark for me, because some sounds that are inside the board, as you saw here today, some sounds inside the board, some percussion instruments, accessories, are sometimes sounding in a certain way, depending on, I don't know, the plectrum with what you play, the quality of the metal, the quality of the aluminum foil. And it happens that for all these noises, sometimes we need to find a better sound than the one which is proposed in the score. So it's true that I remember, for instance, there was a moment when there was a percussion instrument which was maybe, I don't remember, a spring roll of a car, and it was not, this instrument was not sounding very well. We did not have any other. So I decided that it should be another instrument that I heard in the hall that they had for another piece, and I asked them to change. So it happened this time that it's true we changed a bit some things, and something completely remained. Why is that? Because rather than, when you write for percussion, for instance, or for piano inside the board, which is another kind of percussion, right? What happens is that, first of all, it should sound well, very resonating, and sometimes the elements that I ask for are good with one quality of instruments and not so good with, in the case of the percussion. So I don't hesitate to change in this case for something which is an equivalent. So to respond to your question, to address it, I think the notation that I'm using, even though not perfect yet, is suggesting colors. And if you find an equivalent, an instrument, an accessory, which can achieve this color in a better way, I'm open to ideas, let's say. So what is the question mark here? Is what I'm waiting for when I have, for instance, a plectrum going fast on the strings so that we have a metallic sound. Very often, the speed of the gesture will produce a certain character, a certain color, which is important. And the register is very important. If it's in the low register, it should stay in the low register. But because I was there, I could also decide if it was a color that was suiting me or not. And I would say that when you work with such complex sounds, with many noises, etc., you can decide to change a little bit the color, because what is the most important? I think it's not the most important, but the thing which really would give the impression of an architecture is the rhythm. The rhythm is sometimes more important than the color of the timbre. So you can change the color of the timbre without changing the sense of the music. The structure will be perceived as equal to what before. So in order to be clear, I would say that it's possible to change a bit some accessories, some percussion instruments, etc., if the character, the color, and the rhythm are the same as initially imagined. That is not a dramatic change, let's say. I give you an example into classical music. If you're playing Mozart sonata, piano Mozart sonata, and that you change the dynamics, rather than playing mezzo forte, you play forte. It doesn't mean that you're doing exactly what Mozart wanted, but it does not destroy the sense of the music. Whilst if you're playing a cluster is being super chromatic with all the keys on the piano, you destroy the sense of the music of Mozart, right? So it's the same in new music, and I can tell, let's say, without comparing, because music have their own syntaxes. It happens that if you change a timbre in this piece, which is if it remains a noise, for instance, and it does not give a pitch, and the noise is interesting and is in the right register, then it can work as an equivalent. But if the sound that you replace is now a pitch, a note that you can sing, let's say, and not a noise, we have a problem. So I think that, yes, I changed a few things with them because it was sounding better with some accessories or instrument than the one that was in the score that they had, but were not sounding well, because, you know, a tam-tam, some tam-tams are sounding very well, some others not so well. So it's better to change the instrument rather than staying with an instrument that doesn't sound well, right? So I changed, but each time I changed, I remember that it was respecting the register that I was looking for. It was respecting the attack that I was waiting for. The resonance was the same kind, you know. So it was a very personal thing that that I decided with them. We worked, and when I had an idea, I was intuitively respecting what I had written in the score, even though, let's say, it was not exactly the same sounds, it was the same function. It was not threatening the architecture of the piece. Is that clear?
Yes. So thank you for your answer. It's really clear and yeah, great.
Okay, I try my best because it's true that it's difficult to say it without examples. If I was near you, I would show you in the piano, for instance, or with an instrument of percussion. But yes, it's not because you're changing a sound that you destroy the sense of the music. If the sound is equivalent and even sounding better, then it's fine.
Yeah, great. It was really impressive instrumentation, if I can say that, this piece on the concert.
I remember that when they played it, also they were well amplified.
Yes.
And it's for such a piece. So it was not a big hall. It was a kind of small hall. It was a theater, a type theater in Palais in Graz. And it was a very good interpretation that they did, I remember. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
In the preface of our discussion, you've said that you were very influenced by jazz in your early works, if we can say so. And I just want to ask what influences you now? And I want to connect this question to musique saturée itself, to saturationism itself. Maybe saturationism now is becoming something else, like infrasaturationism, that is paradoxically involves reductionism, or maybe something else in your case.
Thank you for the question. I can respond once again. There are two facets in this question. The first aspect you told me about was, if I understood well, you were speaking about the influence of jazz first. So this I can respond a little bit if you want. I can respond shortly. Is that okay for you?
I wanted to ask what influences you now?
Okay. Well, I can tell you one thing. When I started to write in this style, it was back in 1999 with a trio for clarinet, cello, and piano. And then I wrote a saxophone piece, a solo saxophone piece, and then a string quartet, and then this piece for wind octet, and then transmission for thing. At the time, in Paris, the influence of spectral music was very, very strong. Maybe you know those composers. My favorite of the previous century, I would say, Griset, who was my teacher for a little while. Tristan Murail was also someone that I admire a lot. And in France, in Paris, at the time, there was no internet. And you were going to the Concert of New Music, of the Intercontemporain, where I was living in Paris at the time. And spectral music was a very important movement there. And when I started to compose in this style, I had one concern, is that I really wanted, even though I loved this spectral music, I wanted to be different from them. I did not want to write the music of the son of Griset, the son of Murat. You know what I mean? And it was very important for me to find a way of escaping this influence. And intuitively, once again, it was not a theory at all. Huh? I never woke up one day and say, oh, I need to put a bit of jazz in my music. No. Actually, I practiced a bit of jazz as a pianist, not at a high level, I must say, because I was never too much into improvisation. But I listened a lot of Cecil Taylor, of Charles Mingus. I was speaking of Art Ensemble of Chicago. Also a lot of rock music. And I think intuitively, I started to welcome those influences in my music, because also the spectralists never were influenced clearly by this type of popular music. So I think by welcoming these influences, I was escaping the influence of spectralists. Is that clear enough? I think it's an intuitive process for a composer. I'm sure that in the audience, some people have this kind of influence. It was a kind of way of being influenced by popular music in order to escape another influence. It's a mental strategy, let's say. But at the time, I was not consciously doing that. So I welcome the influence of rock, of jazz, I think, into the writing of the instrumental gesture, for the sound, for the influence of electronic music, of the electricity of sound. And I think in all my pieces, even though you don't have electronics, sometimes, or often actually, there is an electric energy inside. If you can listen online, there are pieces like my pieces for cello solo, for instance. I have a piece for piano solo. These are pieces only for acoustic instruments, but I find the energy is not the one of classical music. It's something else, let's say. And I think it's typical of what I'm trying to do. So yes, I welcome these influences, I think, in a way, to contradict the influence of spectral music. And also the one of Lachenmann, which was less influential for me, but it was also an influence, if you want. So what happened is that when I gained confidence more and more and more, I started to abandon, starting in 2010, 2011, if you listen, you have less and less jazz elements in my music. And now, I would say that it's more subtle. You still have the energy of free jazz sometimes, but it's not with figures, with solos, etc. You know? So that's the thing. Now what influences me, it's a very interesting question, because I feel that before I was more influenced by other type of music. And now, maybe because I'm more confident, I try to integrate some other influences that are not musical, that are much more poetic and literary. So I'm working much more with text than before. Each time now that I'm working, not only when I have a piece for voice to write, but also when the music is purely instrumental, very often the images are coming from text, or the structure comes from a text, and these are my influences. Before they were more musical, and now they are extra musical. One thing though, I think in some recent pieces of mine, I started to introduce the voice as a kind of theatrical element in some pieces. And I think this is due to this growing scene of music theater and I wouldn't say performative stuff. That's not really my thing, let's say. But I think I started to have a reflection on the potential of theatrical potential of the sound that I'm using. And I think, for instance, the piano piece that you saw and you heard today, and the bassoon piece, they have a theatrical element. When you look on stage, they have a strong presence. It creates a kind of electricity of their presence, really. And I started to think, how can I exploit and use this theatrical element by maybe other aspects in writing for the instruments. And this is the thing, the reflection I am in at the moment. But I would say that all this concept of saturation, once again, I'm not a conceptual artist. I'm not starting with a concept and find a musical translation for it. It's the other way around. I think directly in music, and then maybe I have some ideas that I formulate out from this purely musical experience. You know what I mean? It's the other way around, actually. Another question, maybe? I don't know.
Yes, one more question, please. Yes, we have a question.
We have a little problem with the technique of Anton, I think.
I have two questions. Thank you for your pieces. And the first question, in your piece for the bassoon, were the primary noises of the instrument coming from gestures or specific techniques of playing the instrument, or it is external noise for you in your piece?
I'm not sure to understand the question. I will try to formulate it. Thank you. Do you ask me if I consider the noise to be outside the instrument?
Yes, yes.
Or part of the expression of the instrument?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
Okay, so I actually, that's interesting because when I started to work with the bassoon, it was back in 1999 with the musician I talked about. He was a student with me in the Conservatoire de Paris. And he showed me some techniques for the bassoon that were producing a certain type of quality of sound. Textural, very much more grain, vocal, some things like in the throat, you know, something like that, very vocal, very physical. And it was more this rugged aspect that I was seduced by, in the sense that it was not only, okay, you can do noise with the breath tone. It was fascinating for me to see that a bassoon, which is a classical instrument coming from symphonic world, could possibly produce sounds that were not pure at all, that could be dirty and very fleshy in the sense that, where the physicality of the sound was so communicative, I would say. And this is what fascinated me more than the noise aspect, in the sense that I was waiting for the instrument to do so much more colors from very pure sound, a pitch, a note that you can sing, to pure noise without a pitch, and to amplify, to change, and to widen the palette of the sounds. So noise is a part of the quality that I'm looking for, but it's not the only one. Otherwise, if there was only pitch on one side and noise from the other, there would not be some kind of subtle gradation of colors. So I'm waiting for all the sounds from pure pitch to noise, and in between I'm playing with all those colors. So this is the idea. I don't know if I respond well.
Yes, you respond.
Okay.
And the second question close the first question. What is the main universe for you? Is the main universe of this piece noise or the sound of an instrument for you?
Sorry, there was a cut at one point on internet and I did not hear the beginning of your question. Could you repeat, please?
What is the main universe for you in this piece? The sound of instrument or the noise?
Okay. What makes the drama, I think, in this piece, it's a kind of little concerto in a way. And I am interested in one thing, is that the tension between something human and something inhuman. And clearly, the situation, the musical situations that I'm shaping are exploiting the limits of instrumental and the limits of electronics when it meets the instruments. For instance, you have a moment where the bassoon goes extremely fast. He plays very fast, and it sounds, because of the speed, it creates the illusion of electronic sound. And this is the most interesting for me, pushing to the limits the instrument in order that we have the impression that maybe it's not human anymore. And that sometimes you have the impression that the electronics is played by a human because it's very rhythmical. And I like to play with ambiguity. So this is for me difficult to respond to the question because it's not noise or pitch, machine or human, but the encounter between the two, playing with the ambiguity. So in the end, you don't know if they hate each other or if they love each other. That's the thing. Is that clear? I like ambiguities, let's say. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
I hope it's clear enough. It's difficult to summarize within an interview like this, but I find the question to be very touching for me because I think everything is important. All the elements should be important and the encounter between them. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank, for your music and your words. Really, really bright and insightful to be here tonight and to hear your pieces. Yeah, I'm super impressed. Thank you very much. I actually have kind of a personal question to you, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit too personal. But, you know, when I just been listening to these pieces, I just felt that they are super powerful emotionally, that they are even disturbing in that sense, even maybe a little bit like expressionism in a way. And I'm not sure if you actually implied it. Maybe I'm just, you know, too anxious for this music. No, but I'm just curious whether you have intended this effect on your listeners, and if you did or if you did not, I'm curious whether that was some personal experience, maybe some darkness that you implied into these pieces, and whether you do this generally in your compositions. And thank you very much again.
Okay, thank you for your words. It's very touching. Once again, unfortunately, I had 1 second of interruption with the internet. It's maybe my connection. So I think I understood your question. You were saying that when you were listening, you felt a bit disturbed, right, by the expression. That's what I understood.
Yeah, it's like very disturbing and emotionally powerful. That's what I said. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, I ask myself. Maybe I'm going to tell you a story about that because it's not so personal. After all, I know that artists, not only composers, are trying to propose some and provoke some affects, right? Some emotions. At least for me, I did music and I decided to compose out of emotions. I'm not a heady composer in that sense. You know what I mean? Really. So this is one thing I wanted to tell you. When I started to write in this style, back in 1999, 2000, 2001, of course, my music was more and more performed in Paris, especially at the time. And I must say something to you that I did not say often, but it was the beginning of a reflection that led me to speak about saturation, actually. This experience was that in concerts, after the concerts, I had very contradictory reactions to my music. In the same concert, for instance, I remember very well, people who were hearing the beginning of the bassoon piece, you know, with the noise, quite aggressive on the loudspeakers, when it doesn't play yet. People came to me after the concert, 2 people who did not know each other. One said to me, I find this beginning to be very stressful, dark, and disturbing for me. And another person came 10 minutes later saying to me, well, this beginning is very funny. And I did not know what to say. I mean, that was very strange. And it was not the only time when I had that. For instance, for my string quartet, I remember it was in Belgium, in Brussels, a very good string quartet. It was the Danel quartet, played my piece. Same thing. Someone came to me saying, oh, this passage is very light. And some others told me it's very desperate. So I started to think, what is the kind of emotion that I want to provoke? And how is it possible that people have such contradictory reactions? And it started my reflection about my music, which I said was very intuitive gesture, started to be more profound at this point. I will try to respond to you in a few words anyway, even though it's a long discussion that we could prolong in the future, who knows. I think that I'm looking in general for ambiguous emotions. I like ambiguity. For instance, maybe it's not something that you perceive. I think there is some humor in my music, but very, very dark humor, in the sense that I'm looking for some kind of very ironic, grotesque situation, which led you to speak about expressionism. Because after all, we have some people in the past, like Bernd Alois Zimmermann, for instance, or some other composers who went exploring the excess and the grotesque and the irony and even the burlesque sometimes in a way which was dark. The thing is, your question is touching me very much because the complexity of emotion is something that I'm looking for. If I was to put things bluntly, the ideal would be that people would laugh and cry at the same time. And this is the thing I'm looking for. I don't say that I'm telling it often, but I like very much. I think maybe in the best case, if you're disturbed, it's because you don't know which emotion you should choose. And this is the ideal for me. Because myself, I don't know. I can tell you Sometimes when I listen some aspects of some passages of my pieces, for instance, I have an ensemble piece. I think of this piece because it's a piece called It, was made in 2004. It has been played in Russia, I think. Yes, it has been played by an ensemble, a Swiss ensemble. I don't remember when exactly. It was less than 10 years ago. But anyway, this piece was performed, and it's going to be played in a few days again here. And this piece has this kind of relationship to musical pleasure, which is ambiguous. Sometimes you feel it's almost painful, dark, desperate, and sometimes there is an aspect of the excess which leads you more to smile. And the fact that you can hesitate is very dear to me. But don't you think that life is like this? It's never black or white. You can turn it into something ridiculous, something funny. Sometimes it depends on your state of mind. The same thing, the same event can be perceived in very different ways. And if aesthetically, the aesthetic experience that we have with any piece, let's say, is complex and ambiguous, it means that I reach a point that is dear to me, is that I'm looking not for necessarily for musical complexity, but emotional complexity, that you can feel several feelings at the same time, at the same second, let's say. But one could think it's expressionist in the sense that there is a lot of emotions maybe that I'm looking for in the same sound. But if it's the case, I'm happy with your reaction.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Thank you. The ambiguity really makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
I don't know myself, but if I know, I will tell you.
Yeah, can I? Thank you very much. I just have maybe kind of a more technical question, but also a bit philosophical. So the first thing is, I was wondering, how did you make the tape? So the electronics, where did these sounds come from? From the sound of the bassoon, which has been transformed, or you made it separately? And so what was the idea with the electronics? Because sometimes, I don't know, it's my personal impression, but sometimes I hear even like the sounds of seagulls. I don't know if they were there, but I mean, this is so complex, the sound. So I was just wondering how did you make it? And maybe also if you could just describe a little bit your compositional method of this piece in general.
Okay, so I can tell something about the way that I conceived the electronics. Even though at the time, especially, I did not have that much experience with mixed music. It's my first official mixed piece, if you're mixing instruments and electronics. I had, I think, a clear idea of what I did not want. I don't know exactly where I want to go, but I know where I don't want to go. This is for sure. This is a mentality of me in general in life. I'm hesitating on some choices, but I know very well what I don't want. So this is the first aspect of the mental position that I had. What I did not want was that the electronic part would be just a prolongation of the instrument. Why am I telling you so? Is that I'm coming from France, and at the time, especially in the 80s and 90s, at IRCAM, where I did this piece, there was a tradition of the electronics sounding very instrumental, quite pure, and it gave some great pieces. Répond by Boulez, I think, is a great piece, but it's very prolongation of the instrumental world, no conflict. And me, I did not want that because I thought for me, I love it, this approach, it gave some great pieces, but I wanted an electronics which can be a character and say, I am the electronics. And that could say a real vis-a-vis, become a real vis-a-vis and a real opposition with the instrument. I did not want something harmonious where the electronics is very often a consequence of the gesture of instrument, where the sound of the electronics is very pure, like an instrument can reach, you know. I wanted an electronics which was much more dangerous for the instrument. And it's true that you wonder, it's a kind of conflict up to death between the two. And in the end, I don't even know who wins, if it's the electronics or the instruments, honest. No. So, yeah, I think sometimes you have the impression that it's the instrument, the bassoon who dies first, and sometimes you have the impression it's the electronic, depending on the interpretation. So, actually, the thing is, I knew that I wanted an electronic which was rough, threatening. I said an acid bath, which would even threaten the personality of the instrument, that it put the instruments in some extreme situations. And so I did the electronics by a lot of recordings of, if I remember well, percussion instruments or excerpts of bassoon improvisations. I put them in distortion in max MSP. I don't know if you know the thing, and some plugins also. At the time, the plugins that were in Pro Tools and so on, JRM tools and so on. So the thing was also, I wanted to have several ways of producing this material, but mostly it's instrumental sounds or noises that are put in distortion, put in filters, in chorus, frequency shift, all the effects that you can find in some commercial softwares, but also some things that were made at IRCAM. And one thing what's important for me is that when we hear, we don't identify exactly how it was made, so that the mystery can still go on. The same way, I wanted that the instrument was transformed, but we don't know exactly how it is, that there is a bit of live electronics, that there is a bit of transformation only acoustically with the mouth, and that this complexity of sources and transformation would create a part of the mystery of the piece. So, yes, sometimes you can say, okay, probably here there is a kind of freezing of the sound. Here he did a multiphonic and he put an effect, but that it's important that you cannot put only one name on the transformation. Then once again, you can hesitate on the complexity and the source and how it was made, because once again, I'm aiming for ambiguities. Acoustic one that maybe lead to an emotional one. You know, you cannot separate the dancer from the dance. If you want ambiguity at an aesthetic level, then you have to create the ambiguities also an acoustic one. I think, at least this is the idea that I had at the time. I don't know if it's clear enough.
Yes, thank you. Maybe, Anton, you have some questions too.
I have around maybe more than a dozen of questions, but I think we still didn't finish with the questions from the public, so let's continue.
Yes, yeah, please.
Hello. Before, while answering another question, you mentioned the movement of spectralism, and therefore I have a question about current time. Do you think right now in the world, or particularly in France, there is something that could be called a movement, or maybe at least some tendency which is most relevant in electroacoustic music right now? And also the second part of the question, what is the most relevant for you right now personally? Like maybe which techniques or which topics in music, and what do you enjoy working on the most?
Okay, so thank you for the question, because I think that things are evolving for me in a way which depends, of course, of the new tendencies. And a composer should always listen to what happens. Otherwise, you lose touch with the world. One thing which is easy for me is that I'm teaching. I taught in California for 11 years, and then I came back in Europe, and now I'm teaching in Austria. Maybe you know this place. It's a place where you have a lot of bright young composers, I would say. So I'm in touch with the new ideas in a way which is immediate. Sometimes I'm annoyed by some ideas. Sometimes I feel comforted. Sometimes I feel that I knew that already and the new presentation is maybe a bit naive. Sometimes I'm a bit shocked. You know, you have a kind of dialogue, permanent dialogue with the young generation. So from that viewpoint, I feel I try to be as attention that as I can. But of course, if I was to follow the new fashion each time, it would not be very interesting even for the audience, I think. I think that when you find your personality as a composer, in general, it happens before your 30s, before or at this moment. In my experience as a simple listener or as a teacher, I noticed that people find their style generally in the beginning of their 30s, and it's rare to find a composer who found his voice when he was 63. You know what I mean? Sorry, I don't want to offend anyone, but it's true that in general, the style, what we call the style, the artistic personality, is generally something that you find when you are at the end of your 20s, beginning of the 30s. This is something I noticed. So what does it mean? It means that generally the thing that I found is focus on sound, the mix between noise and sound, the dialogue between them, this kind of modelization around the electronic as a model for the instrumental world and the ambiguities. All of this was, I think, more or less clear for me with a piece called L'usage de la parole for clarinet, cello, and piano, and was developed later. So I think I found my way beginning of the 2000s, end of the 90s, before I was 30, actually. And after that, of course, new tendencies appear, right? It's like that around you. And I think I tried, I don't know if I'm right or not, but I tried to be always focused on what I wanted to do, mostly about sound, texture, and the drama that can go out of it. But still to listen to what was around. For instance, you know that at the moment, especially in Germany and Austria, more than even in other countries, I think, there is a huge movement around the performative stuff. And I'm looking at that, sometimes very skeptical, I must say, because I think that it goes into a kind of spectacleization of music, which should happen whatever, even if it does not make sense artistically. I have the impression that there is a kind of huge will of transforming new music into a spectacle. Sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worst. If there is no substance, no aesthetics behind, it cannot make sense for me. So I am very skeptical in general with any kind of tendency, but I force myself to listen. So, and I think that some people who are, some of my colleagues now, like Simon Sten Andersen or Alexander Schubert, for naming a few, have an aesthetics and a vision which is personal and using this stuff. Okay, and for me it's fine. But when I see that it becomes a fashion, with everybody trying to say that to do the same, I'm very, very cautious with that, and I'm telling my students that they should pay attention, that it's really a necessity for them. Each time I listen to something new, I try to guess if it's necessary for the composer to do it or not. By necessity, I mean artistic necessity, right? Spiritual one, we're speaking about spirituality. So I think that I'm trying to be permeable, but in the meantime, knowing for what I'm looking for. So maybe if there was not this kind of, for instance, I have some students from Romania that are very much into music theater. And they ask themselves questions that I was not asking myself back in the 2000s, you know. But I think that by working with them and listening to them, I started to ask myself questions that were new to me. And I try to respond in my own way to these new things at stake. And I think it's good to do it, you know. So I'm trying to respond to some influences, but knowing what I am. If you don't listen, you get bored with yourself, I think, because you're not in the world anymore and you're becoming dry as an artist, I think. But if you're listening too much, you're being a fashion victim, right? And that's something. So I think for any artist, the balance is, especially, you know, you have steps. For instance, when I started to find my voice, there was a kind of fever for me to write more and more pieces in that style. It seemed infinite. But after 10 years, 15 years, if you don't renew, and that's why I was speaking about the influence of poetry for me, for instance, which was more and more important, or the influence of electronics at one point also, where I became stronger at that, allowed me to renew from within the vision. But if I had changed completely, it would have sounded cheap, I think. That not very much in my direction. And you know what? I think that not all of us composers, I don't know if you're a composer yourself, by the way.
I am, and actually, I'm. In which city in Vienna do you work right now? And in Graz.
It's okay. In Graz.
Yes.
So if you want, my idea is that any composer has to evolve, but without losing himself or herself, let's say. And one of the question marks for me is that at the beginning, let's say beginning of my 30s, for 10, 15 years, it was very clear that I could develop the same impulsion. And after a while, you need to renew and to make new experiments. And this is a very delicate moment. Even some of the greatest composers, if you think of Ligeti, for instance, he renewed at one point with the voice, and his music became more diatonic. Some people prefer the first period of him. And it was difficult for him, I think, to renew, and he managed to renew because he has a splendid technique, actually. But some composers did not manage to renew and to do something as good as they were doing when they were younger. And this is the kind of question that I'm asking myself, that I need to ask myself. The only thing I think we can hope for, whether you are 30, 40, 20, or 50, is to be able to write in 30 years a piece that you cannot imagine now. That you're still creative with yourself, let's say, in a way that you cannot predict. Because if you can predict what you're going to do yourself, other people also will predict. And this is not something we want, right? I think. Yeah. So these are the questions that I'm asking myself. And I think this question is very rich, but I'm not finishing responding. I'm still processing. That's the thing.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
We have, I think, even two more questions. Huh?
Yeah, I have a new question about history and tendencies and influences. Yeah. I've thought myself, and I read some opinions that saturationism is actually more close not to just classic spectralism, but maybe occasionally, but to hyperspectralism, which is more wild and seems to be less structured on the surface. It seems like an interesting point, but what do you think about it?
You spoke about hyperspectralism, right?
Hyperspectralism, Dumitrescu, and so on.
Okay. I find it interesting. You know, a French composer that probably you might know, called Philippe Manoury, told once in an interview something that I found very clever. He said that the saturationist composers were illegitimate sons of the spectralists. I find the image to be very interesting because it's true that some ideas of new music, of the spectralism, if you want, were inside a certain relationship to sound, a certain relationship to noise, a certain relationship to process also, were in the compositions of my generation. But in the meantime, there was something fundamentally different about it. And I think it's true in the sense that you have the impression that some materials already existed in the spectral pieces, but I think the aesthetics leading with excess, with transformation of sound via excess, whilst in spectral music it was via process, was something new. And I guess that some people were a bit disturbed by the fact that some materials were looking very much like a kind of new spectralism, in the meantime very different, based on an aesthetic which has nothing to do with the one of spectralists. So I think it leads me to have a kind of reflection of what is new and what is not. It's very rare, I don't know if you agree, but it's very rare that a composer invents a lot of material. In the same way, Debussy did not invent the whole tone scale, right? Messiaen did not invent the octatonic scale at all. And you have that in many other, Bill Evans, the jazz pianist, he uses a lot of octatonic scale, right? So what I'm trying to tell is that I think it's very important that we all think of new functions rather than new materials. Each time you put a composition, you imagine a composition, you invent a network of relationships around the material that you choose. For instance, you can invent a new function for a tonal chord. It's not in the tonal system anymore, but it will have a function of a historical function. For instance, you have some tonal chords in Lachenmann, but it's not tonal music, and he puts it in a context which is very different. For instance, in Zimmermann, you have a lot of collage, right? And this collage have an expressionist role because he puts it in loops that say something very different. The context is different. So very often, the composers are meant to invent functionalities for material that they don't necessarily invent. And I think that this saturation thing, you speak about hyperspectralism, in a way, I would say that I think, I cannot speak for my colleagues, but my feeling is that there was this will of reintegrating noise and colors that were in our culture of spectral music that we all had as French composers, but in a context which had nothing to do with that. And I think in some occasions it was clear enough that we are coming from this culture, but in the end the result is very, very different, I think. I hope it's clear.
Thanks you.
I think somewhere around 20 minutes ago, a couple of questions ago, you said that the source of the music is hidden. Am I right? Yeah, and I think it may be considered as a key to your music somehow, because as long as I understood, how do you see your music, is that you are really interested in checking how one element resists to another, and this hidden thing. There is a very famous term of Pierre Schaeffer, acousmatic music, and I'm really interested in if this theoretical heritage of Schaeffer influenced you anyhow, because it seems like you are really interested in this semi-acousmatic state of music. When we see the instrument, we understand that there is an electronic element, there is an acoustic element, but we cannot locate and localize where the music mixed comes from. The question is whether the theoretical heritage of Schaffer is available to you, and whether you see your music as this semi-acousmatic music. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Once again, it's a profound question because, yes, I think influences of GRM school, let's say, coming from Schaffer and Pierre-Henry and Parmigiani after, I think I was much more, let's say, touched by the music of Parmigiani or François Bell, for instance, than the one of Schaffer. But yes, as a theoretician, I think he shaped the whole school of music. That's for sure. He's an important character, if you want, of French music. And yes, I've been very touched by the poetic situation of listening that this movement designed. As you know, the JRM composers, I mean, the one of the French radio, I was naming a few of them, did a music which was completely acousmatic at the beginning with the invisibility of the source. And when I started to write music, which was including some people on stage also, and mixing with electronics, which is invisible, I started to think that I had to give a sense, a meaning to this absence, to the absence of electronics on stage. And very often, as a consequence, not only because of that, because after all, I like drama, let's say. And, you know, this is the beauty of life also. A lot of drama is visible, but a lot of drama is invisible too. Most of the dramas are invisible. And I like very much the idea of a back and forth between presence and absence, between materiality and ethereal elements, let's say. And yes, that's also something that you find in my music at another level, because there is an obsessiveness with the vocal aspect. With actually, it's full of voices, my instrumental music or the electronics, even though you don't have the voice as a part of the instrumentation. And let's say voice and electronics are two things that are present in my music all the time, even though they are not there. I don't know if it's clear enough, but I said that it was a kind of ghost trio, because you have the instrumental world on which I'm working most of the time, but you also have the presence as a shadow of the electronics and also of the voice, in the sense that the instrumental world seems to be influenced by them, even though the voice and the electronics are not there. So I think that intuitively I started to build a strong, let's say, or a complex relationship between voice, electronics, as presence, absence, I would say. It's Boulez who speaks about presence, absence all the time. And I'm very touched by this idea, because it includes the idea that power is not necessarily visible, and that it's a part of the poetry, at least in music. It's something which is powerful for me. I like the idea of, we say in France, ombre portée, a kind of shadow present, if you want. And this is an idea that I did not develop because I'm not musicologist, but for my own music, let's say. But it's an idea that is present in the electroacoustic music. And yes, I'm not, once again, I do not have a definite answer. I think it's still something I'm thinking about. You see, that's maybe why I'm still composing, is that there are many questions that are not finished in a way, you know? Yeah. But thank you for asking. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think It was the final question, I think. So thank you so much, Frank, for your beautiful and philosophical answers. We can continue for for a lot of time, but it's too late now, and unfortunately we need to stop here. And thank you, Anton, for your moderation, and thank you for the concert for all of the CEAM team, engineers and musicians. And we hope to see you again, and we will hope to play your pieces again at the concert. So, and for our audience, I will tell that our festival is continuous. So. You can visit our concerts next week. Please visit our website or our Telegram channel. So thank you so much for all of you, and bye.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say again, thank you very much to everyone of the festival and the technique, and also thank you for beautiful questions. They will resonate long after this encounter, I'm sure, in my head. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.